Thank you for joining us for today's Ipsos webinar, Illustrating the Importance of Empathetic Research in the Time of COVID-19. Throughout today's session, you will remain in listen-only mode. However, throughout the webinar, you may submit questions online using the Q&A feature located on the right side of your screen. Time permitting, we'll answer questions at the end of today's session. However, if time runs short, then your question will be answered by email. Today's webinar is also being recorded and will be posted to our website within about 48 hours. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's featured speaker, April Jeffries, President of Ethnographic and Immersive Research. April, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ellen. So, welcome everybody to our webinar here on, it's specifically about empathy and the role of empathy as we start moving through these stages of COVID-19. And I'm hoping that you'll enjoy this, and if nothing else, get you thinking about some ways that we can start to approach what has clearly become, I even hate the term, new normal, next normal, something that's very different than what we have experienced in the past. So before we get started, I'm going to ask you guys to just do a little game with me. If you could take out your phones and go to menti.com and put in the code 623171. I'll leave this code up for you. And when you get to that page, it's going to ask you the question, what is the first thing that you're going to do when this is all over? And I need you to just put down one word, an activity, a name, a person, something that just represents once this is done, once we're out of lockdown, out of containment, however you want to call it, just give me one word that you think represents the first thing you're going to go do. So I'm going to give you guys a second to do that. Yeah, I start seeing some things coming in. What's interesting is you guys are putting this in. I've done this in a lot of different countries, and we end up with some word clouds that kind of get it done. So I'm seeing lots of really great words coming in. Okay. Keep going. I'm going to give you 2 more seconds to get a word in. Okay. So here is what we're starting to see, although I will tell you, I can't show you how it's changing on my screen, but as it's changing, the very first thing that comes into this word cloud is restaurant, which is funny because that's my word too. Man, I'm so ready to have somebody else cook for me, to go to my favorite restaurant, have a good glass of wine with the things that I love. Some other things that were coming in was dancing and hugging, some travel, right? Partying with your friends and family, getting your hair done. Whew, I can relate to that. So sometimes I like to think of what's going on right now as just a big deprivation experiment that we're all going through. And one of the things we have to just keep in the back of your mind, both for yourself, for your family members, and for your consumers and the people that you serve with your products and services, what are they thinking about? What are the things that are going to, that they're going to go running back to versus the things that they're going to change and they're going to just keep changing? And that's what today is all about. We're going to talk through different ways to think about that and to get some kind of feeling for how we might then adjust ourselves and our businesses as that occurs. So that's the big question on everybody's mind, right? What's next? What's coming up? What's the new normal? What's this going to look like? And I will tell you, the answer to that question is, I don't really know. And anybody who tells you that they know is not telling you the truth. There's no way. This is a new thing that none of us have been through before, right? But here's what I do know. I do know that you're going to have to be patient because this crisis is going to be long. Not necessarily what we're in today is going to be long, But getting through several different iterations of things is going to take a while before we settle into what people are calling this next normal. I think it will be important for us to be focused. It's important to be to identify a couple of good ideas that are clear and simple and get focused that way. And I think it's important to be curious as this happens. And that's sort of what I was doing with that Mentimeter poll, right? Let's just keep asking those questions of people so that we can understand better what it is they're going through and how we're going to get through and what this is going to look like on the other side. I also know that things like your vision and your mission and your purpose don't change. And that's a big mistake that some people have made and some companies have made, right? All of a sudden things start changing or they start acting differently, and you can't. You gotta live by what you've said you've lived by, and that purpose that you're about, find a way to make that relevant in today's changing and crisis environment. So when I asked the question of Colin Strong, who's the head of our Behavioral Science Center here at Ipsos, what he said to me is, listen, there's new routines that are being set. We're learning a whole new way of being here. But he also said, listen, if brands want to be part of people's lives when we come out the other side, then you need to be with them on the journey. And I thought that was pretty profound, because we're talking about distance and being away from people, but at the same time, we're talking about being with them on the journey. So we're going to talk about some of the things that might help us still be able to stay with them on this journey as we go through these significant changes we're all in the midst of. So there's some new habits that are forming, and I guess the big question is what's going to stay and what's going to go. You mentioned in your word cloud you had getting your hair done. You know, I found some new ways to do my hair, but I don't know if I'm going to keep doing that or if I'm just going to be so eager to get back to my hairdresser that that's going to be one of the things done with this. You know, I think these lines and the social distancing and all that is going to be with us for a while, but what will happen to that? How will we learn to adjust to it? So there's all kinds of questions that are out there that people are trying to answer right now. What's going to stay and what's going to go? What's going to be our short-term behavior and what's going to be our long-term behavior? And how is that all going to play out through time? So one of the things that, Ipsos is a wonderful paper, and that I will actually send you guys the link to if you're interested. And it talks about, it's called Signals. It talks about how typically there are these macro forces that act across the world, right? But macro forces are typically really slow. They impact the world in a slow way. They play themselves out as trends in society, and then in smaller bits, they play themselves out as little signals. You start to see local expressions of these things that then become bigger macro forces. And under normal circumstances, it takes time for that to happen. But what's happened with coronavirus is that there's this huge shock to the ecosystem here. And right now, what we've got are a lot of signals that are happening. And the question is, how can we look at those signals to better understand what the trends will be as a result of them, and what those macro forces will turn out to be as time becomes more of a long-term thing. So there was a wonderful article in the New York Times, I think it was last Sunday, that they called it the hammer and the dance. And what they talked about was the hammer is this force that happens, and then the dance is how we all just start to react and settle into that force. But what's going to happen in these next few phases that we're going to talk some more about, there'll be lots of hammers. There'll be a hammer, and then we'll all dance to that hammer. There'll be another hammer, and we'll dance to that. And that's how this thing is going to play out. And there's been a lot of really smart people who have kind of mapped this based on changes that have happened in the past. So what do you do with that? To me, what it led me to believe is the hammer actually creates a whole lot of chaos, right? It's like all these signals, they're coming from everywhere, they're playing themselves out with different people. The question then becomes, how do we make sense of that? And what I typically do to make sense of chaos is to form some kind of a framework that brings that chaos to order. So in this case, I looked at, things that are closed versus open against things that are very conservative versus things that are really open to change. And so then you take some of those signals and you plot them out on a grid like that, and now you can come up with some smaller buckets that you can try to figure out, how do I deal with these things? So for example, a company like General Mills, which is the little cereal circle you see there, they're more conservative for sure, but they're also pretty optimistic about their values. So they've, put some real nice messaging around their products, and they've really started to talk more about kind of what's great about what they do and how that fits in with some of the changes that are happening. And I encourage you to look at different brands and see how this might be playing out for them. But once you've made some order out of the chaos, then the question is, what do you do with that? And I believe you take that order and you add some level of empathy to that. The empathy is what's going to help you then create things that people need and that people will value based on your understanding of who they are. Bob Ludes, who's the CEO at the Association of National Advertisers, said, in this time of crisis, brands are exploring every possible means to remain helpful and relevant to their customers. And making empathy a key part of your decision-making is a very wise approach. And I think these are words of wisdom. So it's like, so we've got chaos to order, and now order, we're going to add some level of empathy. And to me, usually that's in stories, right? It's in understanding the journey of what people are going through. So what exactly is empathy? And here at Ipsos, we've got our own definition of empathy. But, you'll hear people talk a lot about stepping in someone else's shoes, right? We say that it's about thinking what others think and feeling what they feel and doing the things that they do, and sometimes not being able to do the things that they're not able to do, right? And all of that is in service to adding or creating value for people, typically the people that you serve with your brands. But we take that a step further. Not all empathy is equal. What empathy really needs to be for us as business people is problem solving. It's problem solving at its very heart. So it goes from this emotional empathy that's all about, I feel your pain, I understand what you're going through, but it builds. There's a ladder to it. I feel your pain, now I understand you better as a result of that. There's this final step that's super important for us. I feel your pain, I understand you, and now I can bring my resources, my level of understanding, my experience, and I can help you do something about that. So it's not just this soft skill of feeling someone else's pain. It's about solving problems as a result of having felt that. There is a return on empathy. There is something called the Empathy Index that was done by a woman named Belinda Parma. She did this back in 2016, but it still resonates. And what she did was she ranked companies according to what she called was the Global Empathy Index, right? And here were some of the criteria she used as she ranked them. Things like, what were their ethical stances? How about their leadership? What were some of the things that their leadership did, and how did they lead? What is the perception of the brand, and how do people think about the brand? What are some of their public messaging things, and what are the things that they support? Do they talk about their purpose and what that is? She looked at their social media and things that are being said about them, and she also looked at things like diversity, both within their organization as well as in their board, right? These are all things that kind of went into this formula, and she ranked them. What she found was that the top 10 companies actually increased their value 2 times more than the ones that were at the bottom. Their average earnings were up 6% versus the ones at the bottom that were down 9%. And according to HBR, they say that there is a direct link between empathy and commercial success. Businesses are more profitable and productive when they act ethically, treat their staff well, and communicate better with their customers, according to this latest Global Empathy Index. So there's something to be said for why we do this beyond just, being good people, right? Tim Cook, in his MIT address in 2017, said, "People will try to convince you that you should keep empathy out of your career. Don't accept this false premise." MIT is actually my alma mater. I can tell you the people sitting in that audience did not expect this to be the message of the CEO of Apple. We're a bunch of geeks. I claim that, by the way. And we were thinking much more in terms of equations and technology. And what Tim reminded us of is that empathy is important. 150 CEOs, out of 150 CEOs, 80% of them recognize it as key to success. And by the way, aside from the financial performance, CEOs are saying 87% of CEOs say that the financial performance of a company is tied to empathy. But here's what really stood out to me as well. Employees feel that they're more likely to stay with an organization that empathizes with their needs. 95% said that. They're willing to work longer hours for an empathetic employer, 81%. And 60% of employees were willing to take a pay cut to work for an empathetic company. So it plays out not just in your business and your brands, but in your organizations and how you can get the best out of people within them. There is a bit of a disconnect, though. 92% of CEOs believe that their organizations are empathetic, but only 50% of employees report having empathetic CEOs. So we know it's important. We know there's a gap here between the way it's actually playing out. So how do we leverage this idea of empathy as we get through this whole coronavirus situation and really use it to build our businesses and, by the way, maybe even build our organizations as well? We did a study in China, and it's interesting to look at China because, of course, they're ahead of the curve from us, right? And one of the people there in our China marketplace actually did a very nice piece around what was happening as they were going through the whole coronavirus situation there. And what she said was there were stages that we each were going through that started with disbelief, right? And I am sure that any one of you can look at each of these and know exactly where you are at any point in time. I know I go through all of these stages within a given hour sometimes, so I get it. So it starts with this disbelief, this can't possibly be happening. It moves into preparation, and then from there into some level of adjustment. Okay, this is a new way I've got to work. What am I going to do here? Then you start to get acclimated to this. There becomes a level of endurance, and then we move into a whole other realm of anticipation. What we did here at Ipsos was we realized that, actually I'm going to come back to this slide because I think I'd rather take you through the Cymbidium model. So we have Cymbidium right now, which is one of our frameworks, and in it, we look at people's feelings and motivations, right? And we plot them against these two axes. So on the x-axis, you look at personal empowerment. This is where you are about having personal power. What can you do? And it goes along that axis to interdependence. How do you belong within society, right? And then the y-axis is more about stability on one end. This is about my own control and stability versus being open to change. And what we found was as you looked at those stages on this axis, you could start to see people moving through this interesting spiral of things and motivations and feelings as they started to go through the stages. So let me just talk through what that means. So stage one is disbelief. This is like, okay, this cannot possibly be happening. And by the way, even if it is, it's not impacting me. This is something that someone else is going through, right? That's where we all kind of started. The next stage, which is still a very stability situation, right? But we're moving towards our personal stability. So now you start thinking about what can I control? What can I do? Because this is crazy and I need to take control of what it is I can do for myself. right? So here's where you start. This is where people started hoarding toilet paper, right? I got to get enough so that I have enough to do what I need to do. The next phase of this then becomes, okay, we're starting to adjust a little bit. The future is not going to be the way it was. And so maybe it's time for me to form a new routine as to how I live day to day. If I'm working from home now, I got to make sure that I still, get up, get dressed, at least from the waist up, right, while I do my my video conferencing. But there needs to be a new routine that starts to settle in. Then we move over to acclimating. So now, you know what, I'm actually starting to enjoy certain things. Right now, my daughter and I play Scrabble at night. We never did that before, but it's something that now this is something, hey, we're all in the house. Let's play some games, have some fun. People are like starting gardens. They're starting to do yoga, and a lot of mindfulness stuff starts to happen here. The next realm comes into endurance. Okay, so now I've had enough of my husband who's like still working at home with me. I can't stand my family anymore. Or boredom starts to come in. It's like, when is this going to be over, right? And then you find yourself kind of moving into this spiral where you need more stability. And it gets back to a little bit of a scary phase, right? Like, okay, now I need to understand the longer term here. How is this going to affect my life, and where is it going to go? Where is this going? What's this going to mean for me in the long term? So I kind of took you through the stages. I don't want to spend a whole lot more time on that. But what we do at Ipsos, we have our own empathy program, right? And what we've done here is typically, and this is before COVID, we would actually take our clients through, initiating some kind of shift around empathy, and then actually coming up with ways to connect and immerse with your consumers, and then finding ways to act and create value. Now, there once was a time that you do immersions to do that, or face-to-face shop-alongs, but that's no longer an option for us now, right? So what my point, though, is we have to still find ways to connect as we go through this. And there's lots of ways to do that, and I'll talk to you about that at the end. But regardless of how you do it, it is so important that as we move through these stages that we find ways to continue to connect. The initiate part, by the way, has happened for us. Coronavirus has done that for us. It has initiated a shift, and it is now time to figure out how to do something with that shift. So what we're moving into now is almost another round of that spiral that I talked about. The very first phase was about where we are. It is where we are now. It's when we're in lockdown. And when lockdown is over, we move into this second phase, which we call adaptation. Here's where they start, and some of our states are starting to do this, right, in the U.S. Restrictions are starting to get relaxed. But even without the restrictions, before you have a vaccine and you have the, there's going to be distancing, you've got to wear a mask. So there's a little period in here, and we predict it'll last anywhere from 6 to 24 months. That'll have a whole other round of that spiral going on. And then finally there will be a next normal, a recovery phase. But we don't see that happening for another couple of years to really know that we all feel safe, and we all feel like this is something that we get, and we're kind of in a new norm, if you will. The question will be, what do we do in these next 6 to 24 months as we're moving out of this phase 1 of survival and into this phase 2 of adaptation, so that we're prepared, by the way, for what happens in phase 3. It's not going to be the same for everyone. So this is the day after, and as you look at those areas that we plotted before, there's going to be some people who are ready to lapse back into habits and routines and take me back to what I used to do. There's going to be some people and things and categories, by the way, that are going to, okay, time for me to get back my power over my own life. I'm tired of feeling like someone else has control over me. There's going to be some people and brands and categories that actually look at, okay, how do I make myself better as a result of this? I feel better now than I did then. Maybe it's because I started exercising every day. And then there's some people that are going to, you know what, I am just ready to sit with my friends. I have really kind of come through a nice change here. I've talked to people, by the way, I talked to people during this lockdown that I haven't talked to in years just because, you know what, I just want to check in on you and see how that's doing. So it's a whole nother thing that's going to be happening for us all. And we, based on our personalities, based on our organization's personalities, based on our categories, we're all going to be going through this in a very different way. I went and looked at our communities that we have, and we have them in several markets actually, and in them we typically ask things about this phase two. When the virus is over, well, sorry, not when the virus is over, when your containment is over. The virus is still among us, but we're able to get out. What do you expect? What do you expect to happen? And this is some of the verbatims we got back. People are worried. I'm going to avoid taking public transportation. I'm not going to the movies or bars or any crowded places. I'm going to shop, but I'm going to shop more quickly. It's going to be limited. I'm not going to be roaming through the malls like I used to. I will go out with a mask for months, people are saying, if not forever. Maybe masks are the new black dress. Right? It's such a shock, and it's going to carve into my mind for a long time. It's like when, older people talk about that Great Depression. These are people that continue to keep money in their mattresses, right? It's affected them for a long time. I don't know if other people's houses will be the safe places anymore. Maybe I'm going to meet friends out in the open. Here's another thing that people said, though. Some other people said in this phase two, you know what, I just want to forget everything. I want to go back to the way things were before. We are made to forget. That's the way this is supposed to work. Some people, on the more positive side of that spectrum, I'm sure a vaccine will be developed and our life will be beautiful again as before. Some people are going to have a desire for normalcy, right? Keep calm, everything is back to normal. I want to go back to normal as fast as possible, but maybe wearing a mask. I'll get back to progressively to our old habits, and at least just a little will be changed. So there's going to be a twist on the old habits. I'd love in phase two if we could go back to our usual occupations, make our normal a little more normal. So some jobs have become obsolete, or some of them are just in a transition. Some of them are just in a pause and will come back. But these are the things we have to think about and consider as we challenge ourselves within our own brands and categories. So here are the things that you're going to have to ask yourself. Will family matter more as families move closer together? Will habits snap back immediately, things like travel and eating out? Or will it take some time for people to feel comfortable getting on a plane again? Will people enjoy not having stuff? I know I haven't had to buy as many clothes, right? Because I'm just here for me. Nobody's going to see the new stuff. Will we need offices anymore? We've all now got a home office. Everybody's got one. So do we have to go into one? And will climate change become more real? How are we going to approach that? I know here in New York, they, for a while, we were not allowed to have plastic bags anymore when we shopped. And now the plastic bags are back. So, how will that play out? Will we start being more sensitive to these things that are positioned as threats, or will we just sort of take them one at a time? And you know what? I can't deal with climate change right now. I'm dealing with corona, so what do we do? So these are some of the questions that I think you're going to have to ask yourself. And again, plot them out so that you can put them into buckets that are a little more manageable and start taking them one by one with some focus. Here's some other things when you start thinking about how to address these. When you see some of these changes that have happened, you have to start, questioning the circumstances that made the change happen. So, once a condition is returned to normal, is this something that is still relevant in my daily life? So why am I continuing to do this? Is this a change that happened because these circumstances prompted its growth? And once these circumstances are over, that change is no longer relevant. Does it capitalize on things that were in our pre-existing existence, and they just sort of came to the surface now? Or is this something totally new that just sort of broke through and was unique because the time for it was right, right? How much positive feedback did it receive? And how did it perform? Well, people, I know we talked about a lot of people were on Zoom when we first started this. The question is, okay, then there were some issues with privacy. So can we fix that? And how do we fix that? And is there another company that's going to do it better? So all these things in the midst of this chaos, things have risen to the surface that weren't there before. And these are the kinds of questions that you need to ask yourself as you start to innovate and as you start to communicate with people, the things that are going to be relevant for them. The other thing I suggest you do is to look at what's happening during lockdown. For example, we looked at a few different countries and asked them, what are some of the things that you're doing while we're in this social distancing mood? Lots of people talked about entertainment, watching movies. People talked about their hobbies, learning new ones. They chatted with friends and relatives, physical exercise. They put in order old things. They started cleaning up some stuff. So look at what people are doing during lockdown and then ask some of those questions that we just went through. Some people are actually learning a new skill. This was actually from our Italian survey a couple weeks back, but in Italy, you can see a lot of people are saying that they're all learning new skills. And the same thing was happening in other countries as well. We are experiencing a new shopping mode. How we shop has changed. I'm not doing shopping weekly anymore. I see with good planning, it allows me to do it every 2 weeks. I don't have to go as often as I used to, and now I'm used to that. And, I can plan a little better, and I know how I have to do that. So here are some of the signals that we talked about that are coming up here. I love my little froggy there. Basically what that's about is there's I guess it's a myth that says if you put a frog in a boiling pot and you slowly let the water come up to boil, that the frog will die because it just keeps adjusting to the change. But what we've got going on here now is the frog's in the water and the water immediately starts to boil. That's that change that's basically happens, and it's the shock to the system we talked about earlier. And so this frog had to jump out of that pot because there was no adjustment really that was able to happen. So in China, we looked at some of the categories that have seen growth through the crisis. Some of this is no surprise to anybody. Exercise and fitness, education for sure, entertainment and gaming, and experiences. Some people are actually, they can't travel, so they're trying to get their experiences online and through live streaming. I think this whole education piece is going to expose a lot in terms of the inequalities in our system and how we can try to keep people up and going. The fact that people haven't been able to graduate, the fact that parents are homeschooling. I've got lots of Instagram videos of parents saying, "Listen, I didn't sign up for this. I don't know how to do this kind of math." So, there's all kinds of things that are happening in that sense that I think we're going to need to figure out what that means. The other categories that were showing growth that we've seen, again, we looked at China as a canary in the mine kind of a thing. Things like skincare and personal care, for sure. People weren't necessarily using a lot of makeup, but certainly a lot of skincare. So we may see people coming out of this looking a whole lot better than they did going in, right? I saw an ad the other day that had a woman that had figured out how to do a facelift with tapes or something. It was pretty bizarre. But anyway, people have become very innovative about how to get the things that they thought they needed. Nutrition, of course, has become a big category, and people are going to be looking for, what is it that, first of all, there's the hoarding piece, right? Things like rice and pasta and beans. things that you need to make sure that you have enough of? What are your staples? But then there's this idea of immunity, and how does that play out? Because people are concerned if you've got some kind of a rumor that says this is the thing that's going to keep you well, maybe those are the things we need to be focusing on. And then hygiene and healthcare, of course the antibacterial thing is a given, but how do we clean now? And what does that look like, and what are the products that we feel most comfortable as a result of this? Will the category and service growth areas we've seen in the crisis continue to remain strong post-crisis? So we talked about this earlier, but how do you map this out now in terms of what's coming? Do we follow trends? Is there something around security and fitting in? Or are we lapsing back into personal habits and familiarity, right? Or are we really focused on personal betterment and improvement? And what you'll have to do is figure out where your brand fits in that, both in terms of the products that it provides, but also your original mission and vision and purpose, and what fits best as we go through this. Because if you don't do that in a way that's consistent, particularly today with transparency and social media and the way Gen Z thinks about brands, if you are not honoring your position, people will call you out on that very, very quickly. So what is the twist going to be now? And that is the big question. Where are we going with all of this? And what is this going to look like? And frankly, it's a very exciting time to be thinking about this. The great thing is doing research is pretty easy because there's something every day about people who are thinking about the future and what it looks like. And in some ways, we are truly starting from ground zero. The one thing I will say is our CEO said this to me the other day, and it struck me, that the data we have, the numbers and the big data we have from the past has in some ways become obsolete. It looks at the past, not at the future. And I think that as we move into this future, it's going to be a lot of qualitative things we're going to need to just start wrapping our heads around just to better understand, how people are feeling, how their motivations have changed, and some of the things that are really going to start impacting them in a different way. So I would recommend you start doing some hypothesis, some scenario planning around what this could look like, because, again, there's no given answer here. I don't think that anyone can tell you this is what it's going to look like. But there's some things that you can start thinking about, and as a team, start to plot out and map out for yourself. So the challenges of social distancing, and for both in research, for the people we talk to and our clients, and how is that all going to work? Are there going to be new facilities? Are there going to be new methods of immersing with other people? Intimacy may actually become a premium as we move forward, and so how we talk to people and how we learn these things about people, we have to really start keeping our finger on the pulse as to how to do that from now on. We need to fast-track processes. One thing I will say, well, I guess I've said a lot of things, but one of the things that I think is time has just taken on a whole new meaning. Right? When people send me something that I sent to them a month ago, it immediately feels like it's old news, right? Time has just taken on a whole nother element. So, how you get at these things and the ways that we start to really kind of move through has got to be agile, it's got to be quick, it's got to be fast, but it's also got to be thorough, and it's got to have a lot of empathy behind it to understand that. And the use of digital connections has become, this is the way we do things now. So, let's figure out how to have groups and conversations and workshops, by the way, online. How do you do that? How do you immerse in people's lives now that you can't be in people's lives? And once this is over, will being in people's lives be the new thing to do? So that's one of the things that we're thinking about just from a research perspective. But I have to encourage you right now to make sure that you do this with your consumers as they're going through this journey. And we are doing it with our clients as well. I'm going to go back to a page that I skipped because I think it might help to just sort of lock this down. Hold on. Oops, there it is. So as we looked at those phases of coronavirus, my argument is empathy is something that you're going to have to use throughout all of it, whether it's today, whether it's in these next 6 to 24 months, or in this third phase of being in the next normal, right? It is a way of thinking, a way of being, and we do some empathy workshops that might be a nice time to just sort of get your empathy muscle built up again, because that's something that, regardless of the phase, the more you have that, the better off you'll be. Being able to listen deeply to people and being able to observe what's going on, and being able to experience as much as you can what they are experiencing. So how do you do that? Through things like video when you're not there with them. Curation and what I call cultural transferability. I know if you're anything like me, you have been inundated with all kinds of information about coronavirus and what people are doing and where it's going and what's the latest thing. There are ways and there are people who can help you to curate that information so that you can see the key things that are important to you and the themes that are bubbling up that you need to start pushing towards. We have a really great curation team here at Ipsos to help do that. The other thing you can start doing is looking at other markets and seeing how that's working. And if you know that a group of markets tend to act the same way when it comes to some of those things on those buckets we had identified earlier, maybe you can start to address more than one market at a time in terms of how you respond. But through the course of this, there's things like, in this phase, limited online immersive work. We have an ethnography center of excellence where people send in videos right now. And how cool is it to have an anthropologist looking at those videos? We have people kind of looking at the footage as real data. And so they're doing more than just asking questions. They're observing as much as possible in this period that people are keeping a distance. We have communities, online communities, where people are interestingly able to just share so much of things. And I will tell you, people want to share right now. They're lonely, they're bored, they don't have the same level of interaction that they did. So getting a community up and running is a great way to be with people along the journey. Workshopping online is also really a key thing that you can do now, and we've gotten pretty good at it. I have to admit, the first couple of times we were thinking, how in the world is this going to work? Well, there's a lot of ways that you can do that now, and we've got some people who have become real experts at it. So online workshopping is clearly something that can be done. And we talked about curation and cultural transferability. In the next phase, all those things are going to continue to be important. And then what's going to happen in this third phase is all about, now that I can be face-to-face with you again, what will that look like? Will some of the things that we've learned to do online become just habit? Maybe there's better things we can get online, and there's different things that we can get face-to-face. The whole community piece will continue to be a way to tap into what people are doing. And workshopping, maybe there's things that online workshopping can help you get to a little better than when you're actually in the room with people. I know that when we start to do some of this online workshopping, people are actually a little more engaged when their faces are on their cameras and people can sort of see that whether they're typing, you can see when people have disengaged. So I think there's some questions that might actually be better answered online versus others that you're going to have to be in a room and working together and interacting in a very personal and face-to-face way. So research alone is going through its version of these phases, but I would encourage you to think about all these things and, again, do the scenario planning when it comes to you and your brands and your categories to see what's best and how we can how we can follow people along these journeys that they're all on. So that is my talk for today. Ellen, is there anything in here that people are asking that I may need to answer? Display the word cloud again. Okay. I'll show you the word cloud. There we go. Hugging, party, friends. People want to dance. They want their families. The restaurant actually, as we kept going, became a bigger, it was actually in the middle. It replaced friends in the middle. How many people responded? It's hard for me to count up the number of people that responded. It looks like it's about 22. And then the last question I have is, can you explain what online workshopping is and how is it different from virtual focus groups? Okay, so virtual focus groups is bringing in consumers, right, and you have them all online on their faces and their cameras are there, and you as a client are asking them questions, right? Virtual workshopping is having your client group together in a room, and we help you moderate, okay, now you've already done some of this connecting with people. What's the next step? How do we take this from empathy to real action? And you workshop that with your colleagues and your clients and the people on your team. Now, you may decide to have a consumer in that workshop with you, or as part of a breakout session that you might go do with a couple of consumers and have them, argue through a point. But the real point of the workshop is to get from that connection to what's the action, what's the strategy that comes out of what we're hearing here. So they are very different things. One is about connecting with your consumer, and the other is about connecting with each other so that you can come up with an action based on that. So those are the questions I'm seeing. If there's others, I know I will get a list from you guys about who has come. I can actually be reached at any point. My name is april.jeffries@ipsos.com. So feel free to send me an email if you have some other questions or thoughts around what we've talked about, and I would be happy to answer them. Helena, is there anything else that we need to be doing here before we sign off? He says, that's it. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining me today. Again, please let me know if you have any questions or comments or concerns, and I'm happy to address those. You all stay well, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you at some point once we're through with all of these phases we've been talking about. So thank you again.